The morning sun cast long shadows across the garden tomb in Jerusalem, as Marcus Flavius adjusted his leather armor and checked his spear for the 100th time. As a Roman centurion assigned to guard duty, he had witnessed many executions. But the events of the past 3 days had shaken him to his core. The man they called Jesus of Nazareth had died on Friday, and now Marcus found himself stationed outside the sealed tomb where the body lay. Marcus had been present at the crucifixion. He remembered the darkness that had fallen over the land at noon, the earthquake that had split rocks, and the way the condemned man had looked at those who mocked him with eyes full of forgiveness rather than hatred. Unlike other criminals who cursed their executioners, this Jesus had prayed for them. The centurion had served Rome for 15 years, had seen death in countless forms, yet something about this execution was different. The tomb itself was carved into solid rock, belonging to a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea, who had claimed the body. A massive stone, requiring several men to move, sealed the entrance. Pontius Pilate himself had ordered the guard, fearing that the followers of Jesus might steal the body and claim he had risen from the dead, as he had supposedly predicted. The religious leaders had insisted on the security, and now Marcus and his fellow soldiers maintained a constant watch. Saturday had passed quietly. The Jewish Sabbath meant little activity in the area, giving Marcus time to think about the strange events he had witnessed. He recalled how the earth had trembled when Jesus died, how the thick curtain in the temple had torn from top to bottom, and how several of his fellow soldiers had declared that surely this man was the Son of God. Marcus had dismissed such talk as superstition, yet he could not shake the feeling that something extraordinary had occurred. As the first day of the week dawned, Marcus noticed unusual activity in the distance. Small groups of women were making their way toward the garden, carrying spices and oils for burial preparation. This was normal custom. Yet something in the air felt different. The very atmosphere seemed charged with anticipation, though Marcus could not explain why. His fellow guards seemed restless too, shifting nervously at their posts. The earthquake struck without warning. Not the gentle tremor they occasionally experienced, but a violent shaking that threw Marcus to his knees. The ground beneath the tomb split open, and a light brighter than the morning sun blazed from the sealed entrance. Marcus shielded his eyes, his heart pounding as the impossible unfolded before him. Through the brilliant radiance, he could make out a figure descending from above, moving with purpose toward the massive stone. The being that approached defied description, clothed in garments that seemed woven from light itself, with a face that shone like lightning. The figure moved with authority that made the Roman guard tremble. This was no mortal man, no earthly power that Marcus recognized. The very air around the being crackled with divine energy, and Marcus felt his strength drain away as he witnessed something beyond human comprehension. With movements that appeared effortless, the radiant figure reached the stone that sealed the tomb. Marcus and his fellow soldiers watched in stunned silence as the being grasped the massive rock and rolled it away as easily as a child might move a pebble. The grinding of stone against stone echoed through the garden, but it was the sight beyond the now open entrance that caused Marcus to cry out in fear. The tomb was empty. The linen cloths that had wrapped the body lay neatly folded, but the corpse of Jesus was nowhere to be seen. Marcus blinked hard, certain his eyes were deceiving him, but the reality remained unchanged. The dead man was gone, and in his place sat this being of light, whose very presence made the morning sun seem dim by comparison. The other guards had fallen to the ground, some unconscious, others trembling uncontrollably. Marcus found himself paralyzed, unable to move or speak as the full magnitude of what he was witnessing crashed over him. This was not grave robbery or some clever trick by the followers of Jesus. This was something that challenged everything he believed about life, death, and the power of Rome itself. Time seemed suspended as Marcus stared at the empty tomb and the radiant guardian who had opened it. His military training told him to sound the alarm, to report this impossible event to his superiors, yet his body refused to respond to his commands. The very foundations of his understanding had been shattered in an instant, leaving him grappling with questions that had no answers within his Roman worldview. In the distance, he could see the women approaching, their steps quickening as they noticed the disturbance around the tomb. Marcus knew that whatever happened next would change not only his own life but the course of history itself. The man who had died on Friday was somehow alive again, and Marcus had become an unwitting witness to the most extraordinary event in human history. The being of light turned toward the approaching women, and Marcus realized he was about to witness the next chapter of this impossible story. His duty as a Roman soldier warred with his growing understanding that he stood in the presence of something divine, something that transcended all earthly authority, including the mighty power of Rome itself. Mary Magdalene reached the garden first, her heart heavy with grief and her arms laden with burial spices. Behind her came Mary, the mother of James, Salome, and several other women who had followed Jesus during his ministry. They had spent the Sabbath in mourning, and now they came to properly anoint the body of their beloved teacher, the man who had changed their lives forever. As they approached the tomb, Mary Magdalene stopped abruptly, her eyes widening in disbelief. The massive stone that had sealed the entrance lay rolled aside, and Roman soldiers were scattered on the ground like fallen leaves. Some appeared unconscious, others trembled violently, and Marcus, whom she recognized from the crucifixion, sat staring at the open tomb with the expression of a man who had seen the impossible. The women huddled together, fear gripping their hearts as they tried to understand what had happened. Had grave robbers come in the night? Had the authorities moved the body? But why would Roman soldiers be affected this way by common thieves? The very air around the tomb seemed to shimmer with residual energy, and Mary felt a strange mixture of terror and hope rising within her chest. It was then that they saw him. The being of light still sat beside the entrance to the tomb, his presence both magnificent and terrifying. His garments gleamed like fresh snow, and his face held a kindness that somehow made his otherworldly nature less frightening. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of heaven itself. Yet it was gentle, meant to comfort rather than condemn. "Do not be afraid," the angel said, his words echoing through the garden with supernatural clarity. "I know that you seek Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said he would. Come and see the place where he lay, and then go quickly to tell his disciples that he has been raised from the dead." Quote, Mary Magdalene stepped forward on trembling legs, her companions close behind. As they peered into the tomb, they saw the linen wrappings lying exactly as the angel had indicated, but the body was indeed gone. The cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded separately, placed with careful precision that spoke of deliberate action rather than hurried theft. Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. The women, who should have been terrified by the supernatural events, seemed to find courage in the angel's words. He could see understanding dawning in their eyes, a recognition that what they were witnessing fulfilled prophecies they had heard from Jesus himself. The centurion began to recall fragments of conversations he had overheard during the crucifixion. Words about rising on the third day that he had dismissed as the ravings of a desperate man. The angel continued speaking to the women, his message urgent yet filled with joy. "Tell Peter and the other disciples that Jesus goes ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you while he was still in Judea. Do not delay, for this news must reach them quickly." As the women prepared to leave, their initial fear transformed into excitement and wonder. Mary Magdalene lingered near the tomb. Something in her expression suggested she expected more, as if the angel's message, miraculous as it was, did not fully satisfy her need to understand what had transpired. She had been among Jesus's closest followers, one who had experienced his power firsthand, and her intuition told her this encounter was not yet complete. Marcus struggled to his feet, his military instincts finally overriding his shock. His duty required him to report these events to his superiors. Yet how could he possibly explain what he had witnessed? Who would believe that a dead man had risen? That angels had descended from heaven? That the very foundations of reality had shifted before his eyes? His career, perhaps his life, hung in the balance, depending on how he chose to tell this story. The angel seemed to notice Marcus's internal struggle. For a moment, their eyes met, and the centurion felt a wave of understanding wash over him. This being knew his dilemma, recognized the impossible position in which these events had placed him. There was compassion in that divine gaze, an acknowledgement that Marcus had been chosen as a witness through no design of his own. "Your report will be heard," the angel said, addressing Marcus directly for the first time. "But know that truth requires no defense from earthly powers. What has occurred here today will echo through all generations, regardless of how men choose to respond to it." As the other women began their journey back to Jerusalem to find the disciples, Mary Magdalene remained in the garden. Something drew her back to the tomb, a compulsion she could not explain. She had heard the angel's words, had seen the empty burial cloths, yet her heart yearned for more than second-hand testimony about Jesus' resurrection. Marcus watched her careful approach to the tomb entrance. Noting the way she moved, with both reverence and desperate hope, her devotion to the man called Jesus had been evident even during the crucifixion, when she had stood by the cross, while others fled in fear. Now that same devotion compelled her to seek a more personal confirmation of the miracle she had been told had occurred. The morning sun climbed higher, casting new patterns of light and shadow across the garden. The supernatural radiance that had accompanied the angel's appearance began to fade, leaving behind a sense of anticipation, as if the garden itself was holding its breath for what would happen next. Marcus found himself caught between his duty to Rome and his growing certainty that he had witnessed something that transcended all earthly authority. The trembling among his fellow soldiers had subsided, but several remained unconscious, overwhelmed by their encounter with the divine. Marcus knew he would need to make decisions quickly about how to report these events, decisions that would affect not only his own fate but potentially the future of anyone who chose to believe the incredible story of a man who had conquered death itself. Mary Magdalene knelt beside the empty tomb, tears streaming down her face as the full reality of the resurrection began to penetrate her understanding. She had hoped beyond hope that somehow Jesus might return to them. But the actuality of it, the concrete evidence before her eyes, filled her with emotions too powerful for words. She knew that nothing in her life, or in the world itself, would ever be the same again. As Mary Magdalene wept beside the empty tomb, she heard footsteps behind her on the garden path. Turning through her tears, she saw a figure approaching in the early morning light. Assuming it was the gardener who maintained the burial ground, she wiped her eyes and prepared to ask if he had seen what happened to Jesus' body. The man spoke gently, his voice carrying familiar warmth, despite her inability to recognize him through her grief. "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Woman, woman, woman." His questions seemed to pierce through her sorrow, as if he understood the depth of her loss better than she could express. Mary composed herself enough to respond, her voice breaking with emotion. "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." She was prepared to do anything, to go anywhere, to recover the body of the man who had meant everything to her, and to countless others who had believed in his message. It was then that the figure spoke her name, and the single word changed everything. "Mary," he said, with an inflection that she had heard countless times during Jesus' ministry, spoken with the same love and recognition that had first called her to follow him. In that moment, the scales fell from her eyes, and she saw him clearly. "Teacher," she cried, reaching toward him with overwhelming joy and relief. Here was Jesus himself, no longer bound by the limitations of death, standing before her in the garden where his body had been laid to rest. The resurrection was not merely a message delivered by angels, but a reality she could see with her own eyes. A miracle she could witness firsthand. Marcus, still recovering from his encounter with the angel, watched this reunion with growing amazement. From his position near the tomb, he could see the transformation in Mary's countenance, the way her grief had instantly converted to joy beyond description. But more importantly, he could see the man himself, the same Jesus who had hung on the cross 3 days earlier, now very much alive and speaking with one of his followers. Jesus raised his hand gently, preventing Mary from embracing him. "Do not hold on to me," he said with tender firmness, "for I have not yet returned to the Father. But go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." His words carried the authority of divine mission, yet they were spoken with the love of a teacher commissioning his most trusted student. The implications of this instruction were staggering. Jesus was not merely returning from death, but preparing to ascend to a realm beyond earthly understanding. He was entrusting Mary with the most important message in human history, asking her to become the first herald of his resurrection to the very disciples who would carry his teachings to the ends of the earth. Marcus watched as Mary nodded her understanding, her face glowing with purpose and determination. She had been chosen for this moment, selected to be the first witness of Christ's victory over death, and she accepted the responsibility with the same devotion she had shown throughout Jesus' ministry. Her tears of grief had become tears of joy, her despair transformed into unshakable hope. As Mary prepared to leave the garden to find the disciples, Jesus turned his attention to Marcus. The Roman centurion felt his knees grow weak as those familiar eyes, the same ones that had looked with compassion on his executioners, now regarded him with knowing recognition. In that gaze, Marcus saw not condemnation for his role in the crucifixion, but understanding and even gratitude for his witness to both death and resurrection. "You have seen much in these 3 days," Jesus said to Marcus, his voice carrying authority that made the centurion's rank and position seem insignificant by comparison. "When you report to your superiors, remember that truth needs no embellishment. What you have witnessed will stand as testimony for all generations, regardless of how men choose to receive it." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What am I to tell them? Who will believe such a report?" His question carried the weight of a soldier's practical concerns, but also the deeper philosophical struggle of a man whose worldview had been completely overturned in a single morning. "Tell them what you have seen," Jesus replied simply. "Tell them that death could not hold the one who came to give life to the world. Tell them that the power of Rome, mighty as it may seem, is nothing compared to the power of God's love. Your testimony, combined with Mary's message and the witness of my disciples, will echo through the ages." With those words, Jesus began to fade from their sight, not disappearing suddenly but gradually becoming translucent until he vanished entirely, leaving Marcus and Mary alone in the garden. The experience had lasted only minutes, yet both knew their lives had been forever changed by this encounter with the risen Christ. Mary immediately set off for Jerusalem, her feet barely touching the ground as she ran to find Peter and the other disciples. She carried with her not only the angel's message, but her own eyewitness account of seeing and speaking with Jesus himself. Her words would transform a group of frightened, scattered followers into the bold apostles who would spread the gospel throughout the known world. Marcus faced a more difficult choice. As a Roman soldier, his duty was to report accurately to his superiors. Yet he knew that his account would be met with skepticism at best, accusations of madness or treason at worst. The other guards were beginning to stir, and he would need to coordinate their testimonies in a way that preserved some semblance of credibility while remaining truthful about the extraordinary events they had witnessed. In the end, Marcus chose to report exactly what he had seen, knowing that his military career would likely end as a result. He could not deny the reality of what he had experienced, could not pretend that a simple grave robbery had occurred when he had witnessed the intervention of divine power and the resurrection of Jesus Christ himself. The religious authorities, when they heard the soldier's account, paid them large sums of money to spread a different story, claiming that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body while the guards slept. But Marcus refused the bribe, choosing instead to resign his commission and eventually becoming a follower of the very man he had helped crucify. Years later, as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, Marcus would tell his story to anyone who would listen. His account of the resurrection, corroborated by Mary's testimony and the experiences of the disciples, became one of the foundational narratives of the early church. The centurion who had overseen Jesus' execution had become one of the most compelling witnesses to his resurrection, his transformation serving as proof of the gospel's power to change even the hardest hearts. The tomb in Joseph's garden remained empty, a silent testament to the greatest miracle in human history, and Mary Magdalene's instruction to the tomb watchman to stand down in the face of divine intervention had indeed echoed through the ages, inspiring countless believers to surrender their own authority to the higher power of God's love and truth.